The Time Traveller's Wife is a story that comes in many forms. A 2009 film with Eric Bana and Rachel McAdams, a 2022 TV show from Steven Moffat, and it's soon to be a musical as well. But it all started with a book, this 2003 novel that inspired all these adaptations, the debut novel from American writer Audrey Niffenegger. Now, we covered the HBO Moffat TV show across the weeks it ran with a discussion for each episode, and we covered the 2009 film as well. So we're kind of finishing our coverage for now with going to the originator of it all, the sacred texts, the novel itself, the book that sparked so much imagination, not least among writers like Steven Moffat, the book that sparked so much delight and devotion and discourse and debate, the book that really has span out a legacy for itself. So we're going to have a chat about this very interesting book, going over the big picture of the book and little small snapshots of specific passages, going over interviews from the novelist, the legacy of the book over time, all sorts of stuff. So I'm Neo from Australia, and I'm joined by my very, very good friend from New Zealand, Missy. Now, Missy, which Time Traveller's Wife adaptation news has drawn a bigger reaction from you recently? That Steven Moffat's TV adaptation has been cancelled and therefore cut short at adapting only half the novel we're going to be talking about today, or that the musical adaptation is going to premiere so soon on the 30th of September.
Well, you know me, I love musicals, so I cannot wait for... No, I am actually interested in the musical, but...
Me too.
I was very devastated to hear that the show had been cancelled.
Of course.
But it seemed like such a shoo-in. It seemed like I was like, of course it's going to be... Of course it'll be renewed, but it wasn't.
It really did. But that sense of loss is so on brand for the book itself.
Oh, begrudgingly, yes. I have, however, come to terms with it. I feel like the television show did a really good job at being a complete story. So I'm not as devastated as I could have been, but I am devastated.
Yeah, so as you can hear, we're both very interested in the adaptations of this novel. But unlike our TV and movie Time Wife discussions, we are centering on the book itself today. So while we will bring up things from the adaptations where relevant or interesting, we won't be going into super spoilery, extensive detail of what's different with the film and show all the time. We'll talk more in broad strokes with the adaptations I'm planning on. Let's orient ourselves. I know we're both similar readers in that we both take a lot of notes on books we read, but how did we both come to this book? I read the book first, then I saw the film, then I watched the TV show the weeks it came out. What was your story of arriving to the story of The Time Traveller's Wife, Missy?
I had heard about it in its existence, but I hadn't known anything about it until news of the Steven Moffat television adaptation, at which point I decided to give it a read. I started reading the book, I think, after episode 1 of the show, and I finished it before episode 2, so I read it in that tiny week gap between episodes 1 and 2 of the television show.
Yeah, so we both have our own journeys with a story. That's good. I want to start big and look at our big, wide impressions of the book before zeroing in on specific stuff. So what was your general experience with the book when you did read it? How did it feel to you? What was your general takeaway from the book? What stood out to you? Did you like the book? That sort of thing.
Ooh, okay. I did like it. I liked it a lot. I liked it so much that, well, it took me a few days to get into it, but about on maybe the 3rd or 4th day of me reading it, I was on chapter 10 and I just went straight through to the end in like a matter of hours. So something did click for me and I was just like, I gotta finish it. And thinking about what I did like, I like how specific it gets. I like how in detail it is. It's a very, on the surface, simple story about two people and their lives and their loving of one another, and that's it. But it being so simple an idea allows for the author to like really go in depth. So I liked the depth of it and just how hyper-focused it was on such a small, relatively speaking, a relatively like small, you know what I mean?
Yeah. I don't want to get into detail about the second half until later in our discussion, since that's stuff beyond the show and that's stuff easier for people to get spoiled on if they're not trying to hear about it. Mm-hmm. But in general, did you like the first half or the second half of the book better? Because you'll probably agree with me that they're pretty different, aren't they?
I agree that they're really different. I never given any thought to which I preferred. I like both for different reasons. I think I prefer the second half.
Me too, yeah. Well, what did I like about the novel? What I really liked that I think it kind of defies classification in that I know Audrey, the novelist, she kind of bristles when it just gets called like a romance novel. And I think the fact that the TV show and the film are much less sci-fi, in my opinion, than the book kind of gives the impression it's not that much sci-fi, like, oh, it's more magical realism or whatever. But I think the book is actually pretty sci-fi at a lot of points. Audrey is clearly interested in, some of the big genetics ideas or the timey-wimey ideas. I like that it doesn't really fall easily into a pattern you might expect of time travel stories or romance stories or sci-fi stories. And particularly in that is how weird the tonal shifts get, more so in the second half. I think Audrey takes some big swings with the story she's telling, and I like that. And I think this is why both adaptations kind of fall down for some readers who are really attached to the book, is that the book is so kind of encompassing that it's really hard to commit all the ideas and all the approach of the book into an adaptation, because you translating this into live action, or I suppose into music, it's kind of hard to put all the different tones into one thing without it feeling kind of crazy tonal whiplash. Like, I think the film really chooses one tone, the tone of the first half, and sticks with it. The TV show has a little more of the whiplash of, wait, we're being funny now, or what's going on. It's hard to tack onto a tone here. So something I really liked with the book is that, especially for romance fiction, I feel like it tended to avoid being, I am just, a romance story, or I am just this. The book, it was surprisingly unrestrained, which is something I really like. Having read, a lot of time travel stories, or seeing a lot of, romance films, seeing a lot of romance time travel films even, it's nice to feel a bit of surprise in a story like this. So that was something I really liked about the book. Before getting into adaptation stuff a little more, of course, I don't want to mostly talk about adaptations, but I think they're a pretty good entry point into what's unique about the book. But before I get to kind of what's unique about the book, what's unique about the book, distinguishing it from the adaptations, I want to read out, because I'm pretty sure your copy of the book wasn't the anniversary edition, so you wouldn't have had the preview of the sequel novel at the end, and you wouldn't have had the author's note at the start, I believe.
No, that is correct.
That's good. You can have a live reaction here. I'll read out the author's note at the start to you, because it's pretty interesting. I'll leave out one bit of it, which is about the sequel. We'll wrap around to that. But the author's note, I think, is a good kind of entry into the novel as well. And so it's Audrey saying, imagine that you are living your life out of order, lunch before breakfast, marriage before your first kiss, conversations end suddenly and then begin in the middle, a cigarette appears half smoked between your fingers, you come home from work one day and your infant is 16 years old and sports a mohawk. Or imagine that your lover disappears a lot, sometimes for several days. When you ask, where have you been? Your lover looks embarrassed and says, time traveling again. And you know your lover isn't joking. After a while, you stop asking. Imagine that these two people are married to each other. The marriage has to be an elaborate dance of knowledge shared and withheld. No one really wants to know how their own story ends, and even the smallest bits of the future can poison the present. The husband, an involuntary time traveller, must protect his wife from their future, while the wife has to be careful with the parts of their shared past which her husband has not lived yet. The husband and the wife become intensely aware of the present moment. In the present, they are free to make decisions, free to experiment. They learn to savour their lives because everything is uncertain. And at the same time, some things are already too certain. They live and love in the present tense. I wrote The Time Traveller's Wife for 5 years. I wrote it out of order. First the ending, then a scene for Claire Abshir's 18th birthday, then Henry de Tamble's first time-travelling adventure, a trip to a natural history museum in the middle of the night. I knew when I began to write that their story was simple, universal. The things that happened to Henry and Claire happened to us all, though the rest of us are thankfully allowed to experience these events in the customary order, not randomly. Henry and Claire's job is to make sense from chaos, to preserve normalcy in the face of confusion. The device of time travel allowed me to tell the story of a good marriage in a way that made ordinary things worthy of special attention. In the face of obstacles, normal life is a triumph. Time travel can be read as a metaphor for memory. We're all time travelers in our minds, if not in our bodies. Like Henry, we jump back to moments of humiliation, loss, joy. We find ourselves flung seemingly at random to ordinary days, small unnoticed pleasures. Our present is created and shadowed by our past. We live in the present, blissfully innocent of our future. Then she says a little thing about the sequel novel, and then says, Many readers have written to tell me their thoughts about The Time Traveller's Wife. It made me wish I could talk to my wife when she was young. My husband is in the army. Our relationship is like the Detambles. He's always leaving. It made me appreciate my girlfriend, what we have now. If you are far away from your lover and family, if you have lost someone, if you feel a bit displaced in your own life, these stories are for you. That's her author's note. And it reminds me, when we were discussing the TV show, sometimes we'd laugh about how Steven Moffat had this tendency to really openly explain the themes of his story and really openly explain the approach he's taking in interviews to the point of repetition. It's nice here to have Audrey kind of openly say the ideas of her stories out like that. What did you think of that note there?
Interesting. I really liked it. I liked the stuff she was talking about, like small unnoticed pleasures, and like I can't remember the exact quote, but like when she said something about showing that like ordinary things are worthy of being focused on, that was cool.
Yeah.
The biggest thing that like jumped out to me was how she wrote it for 5 years and out of order.
Yes.
So I was like, that's a very interesting, at least in my mind, method to approach writing this kind of story. It's cool in a way because it does reflect the narrative of the story. But yeah.
Well, if you're interested in that, I can read from a interview she did in 2006 where she says, the original idea came in the form of the title. I wrote the ending first and then the scene in which Claire loses her virginity. The book was written in no order at all, just me working on whatever I had some idea about. Towards the end of the process, I radically changed the order of the scenes to flow along with Claire's experience of time. Before that, they'd been organised thematically, which several friends told me was too confusing. And I know our friend Oliver really liked the third episode of the TV show, kind of felt like a thematic vignette, like it didn't really necessarily fit into the timeline such as it is of the characters. It was more just kind of a, with a big timey-wimey story, if you just want to kind of narrow down one idea, this is a story you could tell. So yeah, it's interesting she wrote it kind of in that way and only really imposed the structure at the end.
That is really cool, and it must lead for like thematic connections across different parts of the stories.
Yeah. I will say, one of the things I don't love with the novel is, I think it's, especially in the first half before the stakes, kind of heighten, it's very repetitive, isn't it? Would you say? Like, I feel like I've read so many scenes of Henry and Claire, like, preparing coffee. And, like, on one hand, I understand, a big push of the story is, take pleasure and treasure just the little individual moments of, ordinary life. That's kind of the time travel lesson is, not to obsess over your past or future, somewhat out of your control, but to zero in on the present. And I get that, but there was a lot of present in the book. What did you think of that?
No, I get what you mean. Well, if I did notice that, I wasn't annoyed by it, but I do get what you mean. There's lots of moments of quietness and lots of moments of similar moments of just like their lives being lived.
Well, my impression would be that since she wrote it in this kind of, chaotic but pleasurable way of just taking whatever direction she felt like and only kind of sorting out the order at the end, that, without that structure, it probably makes sense that you do repeat, your ideas a lot across, the different chains of stories you're writing. So I see how that happened. And it's a fairly big book. Yeah, that was one of the things that didn't work for me so much, was just the kind of general repetitiveness of a lot of it. Yeah, I think that's interesting because the adaptations, the film is like, it's it's very abbreviated, like to the point where you wouldn't believe some of the stuff they cut out just because it feels so central to the story of the book and the TV show. And then the TV show, some people are like, wait, it's not doing the whole book in one season. Like they're almost like you kind of deserve the cancellation for, taking so much time with the book. The TV show did cut out stuff as well, although a lot of it is stuff I think that makes sense to cut out. Not like we're pressed for time, we can't possibly get this in. More just a kind of choice of tone and focus. But yeah, it's quite a big book. Yeah.
You're talking about the repetitiveness and the stuff. And I understand how like writing it out of order would make you, like, you wouldn't realize that you'd be covering similar ground over and over again until you press it all together at the end.
Yeah.
But I do think it, like, for me at least, it resulted in having the moments where stuff really, really changes was like much more impactful because we'd have moments of normalcy. So the punctuating moments of weirdness would be like particularly weird, which I liked.
It's a tricky balance. I know a lot of television, since television is so long form, struggles with this too, in that if you make things go too fast, then you're training people to get bored with scenes that might be really important for characterization, but you're training people to only focus on, action, or it doesn't have to be action, but, some kind of big activity. You're training people to only want that kind of stuff. And then if it's like Game of Thrones' last season had one really slow episode, and I think best written episode of the season, if you ask me, and a lot of people would agree, but I think the pacing of it feels wonky because the rest of the season is hilariously on fast forward. Like, it's insane how quickly they're pacing through events of the story. And then you have one episode which is, very little events at all. And it's very well written, that episode 2 of season 8. But you've trained your audience across the previous seasons increasingly that, the big action is the big events and what we look for. And so then when you stick a slower scene in, people are like, well, what the hell, is this? Because you've trained them to not kind of go for that so much. And some shows really have to take their time. Like, I know I've seen people watching slow shows like Mad Men or Better Call Saul. It takes them like 2 seasons to sink in and kind of realize, oh, I'm not really waiting for the big moments. The show is actually the little moments. The mundane little conversations are the show. I'm not waiting for, Don Draper to do a huge climactic thing in an episode 13 because then I'm watching 12 episodes and being bored. The stuff I'm being bored with is the actual show, and therefore I've got to... Yeah, so I completely get what you're saying, that the book, I still think it absolutely could have been cut down by quite a bit, but the issue is a pacing of a story has to be so that the slow scenes are still, people will, take joy in them and not think, oh, this is just the in-between stuff between the big events. You've got to kind of structure it so that people realize the slow stuff is the meat of the story. Yeah. A tricky thing with pacing. Absolutely.
Yeah. It's just that question of like filler and what is filler and is it even a thing? And
Game of Thrones, especially towards the last few seasons, got impatient with the story it was telling and kind of started to fast forward through events, basically.
I agree.
And so, so you'd understand what I'm saying. Yeah. It's like this sort of scenes people might treasure in season 1, like that scene with Robert and Cersei just talking about their marriage, or Jaime and Jory Cassell just talking about war stories. Those scenes in season 1, I think people are more likely to like because season 1 is kind of slower with the pacing. And so you don't feel like you're wasting time. You feel like you're learning the world. But by season 8, when everything keeps getting faster and faster and faster, in the seasons, in the episodes, in the actual individual editing of scenes, then you can stick some great character writing in a nice slow scene. And sure, some people are going to like it, but a lot of people are also going to be like, what is this? I've been trained out of seeking this. So it's tricky for books, I think. But a book, of course, is so different from a show in that a book, you kind of determine the pacing. To a degree, you can't with a TV show or film, lest you're one of the people who likes to change the speed of things. With a book, I can shut it in the middle of a chapter if something calls my attention, Like, the chapters are there as a kind of a pacing marker, but I think the reader has so much more agency with a book I read the book in few sittings because I like to read things in as few sittings as possible. That's just what works better for my mind. But someone could read this book over 2 years. Someone could have a routine of I'm going to read 15 pages before bed every night. So I think pacing is kind of trickier to talk about with books because there isn't as much of a shared experience as a film, which we might have all seen, on the same speed. So I think that enters these discussions as well. Like, if you're someone like me who read it in very, very, very small sittings, maybe the repetition stood out to me more because I was, in the same sitting, I would have, experienced a scene quite similar to itself many times. But if you're reading the book a little bit every night, that probably comes across less to you. It's the same with people that binge shows, actually. I see.
Yeah, good point.
People that binge shows tend to have a very different experience. When I binged the Doctor Who redacted audio drama lately, I had a very different experience than my friends who listened to it over 10 weeks. We had lots of little different experiences of the pacing because of that. So that's something interesting with talking about books, I think. Other things I liked in that author's note were her saying the time travel metaphor for marriage, of course. Metaphor for memory, I really liked. We're all time travelers in our minds, if not in our bodies. Like Henry, we jump back to moments of humiliation. We jump forward to imagining the future. I totally agree with that. That's something I...
Yeah, me too, very much.
I feel really strongly about that. We experience so many stories linearly that we kind of get the impression that time is linear, like, for us. And yeah, of course, like, time goes linearly in the real world, exactly. But do we live in the real world or do we live in our brains? Is my kind of thing. We live in our brains, and my brain is always thinking, oh, what am I doing next week? Or, what's my 5-year plan? Or, what's... So I'm always kind of projecting to the future, and I'm also going to the past. I'm cringing at an embarrassing memory, or I'm laughing at a funny memory, or, just little bits of grief, from people I've lost, might come back into my mind. My mind, and I think most people's minds, aren't just living in the moment all the time. Like Audrey's kind of saying, that's what we should do, treasure the moment. The way our minds work isn't to just live in the present. It's to, zim, 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 present, past, future. We're always mixing between. And so I love stories. It's one of the reasons I like time travel stories in general, is because I think it kind of plays better with my brain than linear stories. Are those stories that do jump around, because I kind of relate to that more, if that makes sense.
I agree. I think so too. Yes. I don't have anything to say, but yes.
I know we both feel strongly about that. Yeah. And of course, that's why, like a sci-fi writer like Steven Moffat jumped to this book so much, because it's not just, always a time travel storytelling gimmick. It's, the psyches of the characters are like time traveling. We're seeing them at all these different ages, and that's how we come to a really encompassing view of the characters, is because we see them at different ages so much, and we also see them reflect, on, young Claire thinks about what will my future be with Henry, and then the older versions of both characters think back to their youth a lot. They're not living in the moment. They're a collection of all these different moments, even moments they haven't lived yet, and that's what the conceit of the story really lets Audrey do, is kind of rub this up against each other, like literally having, I know you from the future before you know yourself. And that really lets you interrogate a lot of those ideas. It's a great premise for a story.
Yeah, it is.
I think it's interesting also to look at talking about unique things with a book. Some of the stuff the book does that the film and TV adaptation don't. I can't speak to the musical. We'll see when that comes out. I think it's interesting to look at some of the differences, just to kind of clarify what the book's doing, that the adaptations aren't so much. So the narration in the book, the film focuses more on Henry's perspective, and it's kind of vaguely chronological with him a lot of the time. The TV show kind of trades off, between them across episodes. And of course, the TV show, also unique to the TV show, are the direct-to-camera documentary things, which I feel like we can probably intuit where those were meant to go in a later season. I don't know if you feel the same way. I assume they were for the subject of the sequel, if you know what I mean.
The only idea I really had, so yeah.
Yeah, but that was unique. So the book doesn't have that sort of framing device, because it doesn't need it. It's a book. You're right in their heads. Moffat had to kind of contrive how can I get their internal narration to camera? Oh, I could just literally do it to camera in recordings. Whereas in the book, we're drenched in their consciousness all the time. So the book doesn't have the narrations to camera. The book is more focused on Claire than the film, certainly. And the book starts with Claire talking about it's being hard, being left behind, waiting for Henry, wondering if he's going to be okay. The TV show starts with Claire asking, why is love intensified by absence? The film starts with Henry's origin story. So they all kind of enter into the story differently. The hair of Henry is approached very differently in the 3 adaptations. The TV show makes a huge character arc out of Henry's hair. The film covers it in kind of an incidental way. And the book, I think you can miss the change of the hair, honestly. It's quite throwaway, isn't it? Was that your experience?
No, actually. My experience was, you know what it is? It's another example of, like, treasuring the small moments and focusing on the small moments. Where it's like, for me, it was written as a very small, nondescript moment, but with the context of Henry's having, the later Henry's having short hair, and the shorter Henry being Claire's Henry in a way. Even though it was a small moment, there was lots of meaning behind it. So for me, it was a big moment.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I can see. I think that also comes back to how we modulate our own pacing a bit. Yeah, I guess you can kind of rebuke me for, because there's not as many words on it, me feeling it was more throwaway. Then maybe Audrey intended it, and then certainly as you experienced it. That's interesting. Yeah. I think the approach to time travel, like the rules are the same across the adaptations. I guess this is a tonal thing. In the book, the first half of the book, like there's sadness in it, of course. There's the stuff with Jason, and there's stuff about other aspects of Claire's childhood, and there's difficulties of Henry's adolescence and everything. Like, it's not all sunshine and roses, but the first half is pretty romantic in the vein of the film. The TV show ends the first episode with, like you were saying towards the start of our discussion, how the TV show it adapts half the book nominally, but it encompasses suggestions and kind of themes from the second half as well. The first episode ends with an aspect from the second half, kind of an aspect of the body horror which the second half goes quite a bit into, an aspect of the kind of grisly mortality reminders in general, all that kind of thing. The first episode kind of ends with raising this in your mind that this isn't necessary. Well, we talked about Game of Thrones. If you think this has a happy ending, you haven't been paying attention. The TV show kind of ends in HBO style with that. The book doesn't. The first half of the book, I think, is pretty on the level romantic. It's not all sunshine and roses, but it's pretty romantic. And then when the tone shifts in the second half or in the next 2/3, it is more of a surprise to me anyway, reading the book, for the first time, that, oh, wow, you've changed tracks here to an interesting degree. The TV show kind of foregrounds that a bit more. So that's another interesting difference. In the film, Henry and Claire get along really well to a kind of point of stasis, I think you could argue. In the book, they argue, but I think they get along fairly well. Like, it's a pretty realistic relationship, it feels to me. And the TV show, they're at combat for a lot of it, aren't they? And I think the TV show is very interested in really interrogating, well, how would these people feel? I think the book, especially in the first half, it's much more than a romance story in a lot of ways, and there's nothing wrong with being a romance story, and it really is a romance story. I think there really is a wish fulfillment aspect to the book, certainly in the first half. They get on pretty well, despite having some arguments. Whereas in the TV show, they don't get on that well for a lot of the TV show. So there's another different kind of focus point. The book focuses more on the sci-fi mechanics, but I think the TV show focuses more on like the time travel storytelling gimmicks. Like the TV show likes doing multiple Henrys.
Yeah.
Or it takes more interest in multiple Henrys than the book. But the book takes more interest in kind of nailing down the sci-fi. Like the book has these kind of ideas of, in the future, what if there are more time travelers? The book really gets into specifically biologically how is this time travel happening. So I think there's an instinct to say, hey, Moffat, Doctor Who, he's going to be the more sci-fi one. But I think he's absolutely the less sci-fi one, but he's more into the kind of structural gimmicks you can do with having two Henrys in one scene. Would you agree with where I'm going with that there, or what do you think?
Yeah. I think another interesting thing to consider, based talking about how the time travel is used, is that Moffat does focus more on the structural gimmicks and like thinking of what, how do I say this? Yeah, like what structure wise you can do with a time travel story. Whereas Audrey is like focusing on what can you do plot wise or emotion wise with a time travel story. So I think in addition to the literal specific like sci-fi-ness of the time travel, she focuses a lot on, compared to how Moffat would do multiple Henrys or events leading into other events in a clever way, she would focus less on the fanciness of time travel stories and just how they would affect the characters.
Yeah. The only other, I think, big difference coming to mind right now is the difference in episode 3 of the TV show. But I think we discussed that at enough length there. That's the staging of a scene with teenage Claire. Mm-hmm. The book, you can at least say, is vaguer with it. There's, people will argue over whether there was explicitly assault in the book or not. And like we cover this more at length in our episode 3 discussion, but there is a difference that the book is vaguer about something the TV show is very direct about. There is a bigger difference, actually, that comes to mind to me now.
Oh, yes.
And that is, the book is it's full of allusions and lots of stuff about literature and about art, and it opens with epigraphs all the time. It's always using quotations from poems and other stories and things. Would you agree with that?
Yes, very much so.
What did you think of it doing that?
The epigraphs, like, I was just like, oh, okay, but the like non-stop referencing of like artists or art or things, it did wear on me very, very much, especially like very early on. They're like, right from the start, it's like, when Henry first meets Claire, and he describes her as like a Botticelli by way of somewhere else, and I was like, okay, interesting way for a character to speak. And then it just like didn't let up from there, and it did wear on me, especially since I was like, I don't know any of these people. Audrey
is a very intelligent and well-read woman. I'm very aware of that from the book itself and from interviews and seeing some of the other work and whatnot. And I think there's an extent to which it fits the characters, and I think it actually matches them well. Like Henry being condescending over like a lot of his knowledge about literature and about art, I think is a good. Well, it's not a good, but I think it's a distinctive character trait of his, and it leads to some interesting friction in the relationship sometimes. But there's a little bit of, hey, we can compare this to the TV adaptation in that Steven Moffat sometimes has it levied against him that all your characters sound the same. It's like if just one character was talking like this, I would buy it as just a character trait of Clara Oswald or the 12th Doctor or whatever. But the fact that a lot of your characters will, say these very witty quips at times makes it feel a little more Joss Whedon in that it's like your wit is kind of infecting whoever because you can't resist a good joke. If no matter if the character in the room would be that witty, you can't resist the witticism of what you've just thought up and then you put it into a character's mouth is the charge, laid at Moffat's feet sometimes. I'm not saying whether I agree or not. I think it's a complicated issue. But the connection here, I guess you could say, is that there are times when characters who aren't Henry are making literary allusions where I kind of go, well, sometimes it feels to me like it's Audrey's knowledge coming through characters.
Yeah, agree.
I very much buy it with Henry. And for some like more artistic knowledge, I buy it from Claire. But there are times where I'm like, I get the connections, or sometimes I don't get, and I have to Google the connections. But I understand what you're saying with these allusions. But sometimes I feel like the book is a little allusion heavy, and that's Audrey's personality coming through. But sometimes maybe at the expense of distinguishing the characters.
Yeah, I agree. I do think like a few times I read some of the times Claire would do it, I read as her either learning from Henry or maybe trying to impress him a little.
No, I agree. That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, it's like it's almost a sad thing. She's trying to be the cool girl after Henry. Yeah. Although, and it's like one of those circular things, especially with how fated their love is like, is it a cool girl thing if she genuinely does like the bands he gets? We know they don't like each other's bands. There's quite a thing about that actually. But yeah, the circularity and the fated predetermination of their love story sometimes makes it tough to ascribe much agency to either of them, because it's like, say Claire did end up loving a writer that Henry kind of dickishly was pushing at her, because they're so circular. Was she always going to love the writer? Like if it was inbuilt into her to love the writer, it's very tricky. And I think the story wants to avoid that kind of question because of it's so predetermined. But yeah, there's a get out of jail free card for some of Henry's dickishness, I guess.
That question of agency is just hanging over the entire thing.
Yeah. I will say, I don't like epigraphs, like in general. I don't like when a film opens with a quote. I don't like when a novel opens with a quote. This is just a personal thing of mine. I know some people really like them and they think it's a really neat way to set the stage of the themes of a story or something. Maybe I'm being a killjoy or anti-intellectual or something, but I'm always like, like a Scorsese movie is going to tell all its themes pretty clearly. The quote isn't needed at the start, basically, is my kind of thing, is that the work's going to stand just fine as what it is. When I kind of roll my eyes at epigraphs and opening quotes and stuff like that, because I'm like, yes, I see how this applies, but I would have seen that anyway with the book being what it is. And so like a film just doing one at the start and one at the end is one thing, but for this novel to have so many epigraphs, like I get it, it's that, it's Audrey's inspiration and it's work she really likes. And, part of it is even, might even be saying to readers, check out these cool people, these cool poems and that are inspiring me. And I get that. And it's, a lot of readers really click with it. But for me, I tend to dislike them 9 times out of 10. Not a big deal, but yeah, it's like your story more than makes itself plain enough. And I kind of roll my eyes at, and here's the epigraph to also draw that link. Time is our bank manager, tax collector, police inspector. At the start, I was like, yeah, cool. That makes sense for setting the stage. And then we get so many more of them that, yeah, the novelty wears off a bit for me. But that's just me. I think most people like them more than I do.
I think some of them in this book were like a bit heavy-handed, but I do like epigraphs generally. I mainly because I don't put much stock in them. Sometimes I like don't even read them. I just like glance over them. But I just think it's fun.
Yeah, it's a funny thing. I know some people like will skip songs and poetry like by the actual author of a book. I see this loads of time with Lord of the Rings. Yeah, people are like skipping the songs, and I'm like, man, not only is so much work and artistry going into them, like they're there for a reason. Like Tolkien puts in this. Yeah, that's not just meant to be, I wrote a random song. Like when he puts certain songs in at certain points, they're absolutely meant to give you sometimes exposition, like about the world building that you might need. And often it's to reflect on the character. Like they're very intentional And I guess you could say epigraphs are the same, but to me there's a kind of disconnect where I'm like, but that author doesn't even know Audrey. You know, that isn't a wholly independent work. And I know that she's influenced by it. But for me, like, I don't understand song skipping at all in, Lord of the Rings, but epigraph skipping, I don't do it, but I would understand why someone would, because there's that kind of independence of the work thing. Yeah.
Yeah. I like it in that kind of, what you were saying is, you mentioned, how Audrey might be like gesturing towards people, like, check out these influences I have.
Yeah.
Other relevant things. I enjoy it in that way. I enjoy when there's an epigraph from a thing and I read it as like, this is a related text, which is fun. So I enjoy, like, kind of, I like, it's fun to me to have the author be like getting a glimpse into where they're at when they're doing the writing of it. Like,
yeah.
Audrey would have had this quotation in mind or works by this person in mind when she was writing this, and that can be fun to just a bit more context to the general story.
I know something some readers enjoy these days is authors sometimes share like their Spotify playlists for this is what I was reading.
Oh, yeah. That's exactly what I'm getting at.
Yeah. So I understand that. Bringing up Lord of the Rings has made me think of The Hobbit famously was partially inspired by the first line of it just kind of came to Tolkien randomly. In a hole in the ground there lived a hobbit. For The Time Traveler's Wife, that phrase of the title just came to Audrey out of nowhere. And that was the genesis of the story, was the time traveler's wife just occurred to her, those 4 words. And then she started, thinking about, what could that be? What could I do with that? And then this is really interesting to me. So Audrey's from a visual arts background. That's what, that's where she comes from. And
right.
Her art and hobbies and stuff were like making specialist books, with like art and stuff, and like binding a book herself. Lots of like Claire in the novel very much is Audrey, in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
Like the sculptures and all that kind of physical art. That's like a lot of Audrey's background is that kind of thing. And so initially her idea was to realize the time traveler's wife, that phrase that came to her, and the suggestions of story that could be in a kind of, artistic way or in a visual way, because her reasoning was time travel can't be still images. It has to be either a novel, because then you can get into and describe everything, or it has to be a film, or a TV show in motion, because that lets you, realize the time travel more. And so she didn't end up realizing it as a comic or sculptures or whatever. She ended up realizing it as a novel because, she was a young artist. She can't make a movie herself. Ironically, though, the interest in adapting to a film came about before it was even published. There was interest in, it got optioned and everything before the book came out, back when it was in manuscript format. So some irony with that, how that house span out. But yeah, so like she wasn't married to it being in a novel at the start, and the phrase just came out to her out of nowhere. And this connects to our points about pacing earlier. She also says she found it easier than writing a short story because of the free length of it.
Yeah.
Maybe that comes back to the repetition thing, is that she felt less restrained with it than a short story, which, has to have that clarity of form.
That is really interesting.
Yeah. And so there's a good video of her where Neil Gaiman interviews her at like a live event, and she tells him that, from the phrase coming to her, the time traveler's wife, therefore the husband time travels and the wife waits for him. And, then the characters start coming to her out of there. And then the book blew up quickly. Brad Pitt and Jennifer Aniston's old studio were the first to, get interested in the book. And then, other studios here, Brad Pitt and Jennifer Aniston interested in doing this. And then, all these people get interested. And then, the book gets, she gets TV interviews quickly. I think part of it is the title is so good and, the premise is so good.
Oh, definitely.
And, it was a different time, back late 90s when she was writing it, and the early 2000s when it came out. Kind of a perfect storm. It's a good book, obviously with some luck there as well. But yeah, she really kind of wrote up on that, and the book got very, very famous. And I think, and this is kind of difficult now, that it's, about 20 years later, aspects of the book, and, I was around, but I wasn't reading the book, in those years. But I feel like from what I've read from reviews of the time, contemporary reviews, because I like checking out how books are received when they come out and then checking out how they're received later. My impression, and this could be off base, if anyone listening, read it at the time, I'd love to hear about this, is that the complaints about grooming and stuff like that, obviously some people were feeling that on their first read of it in 2003.
Mm-hmm.
My assessment of, poking around at reviews over the course of time of the 20 years is that this came to the fore more around when the film came out, and even a bit later than that, kind of a cultural reassessment of the book in some ways, and earlier on, less of that, which surprises me because I think the book, obviously so much more so than the film, which really kind of doesn't put any salience onto the grooming stuff, apart from one scene maybe. And then the TV show, which, jokes about it and does full on go into it at points, but I find both live action adaptations, and this feels ironic because they're live action, therefore you think they'd be more creepy actually seeing, a child actress next to an adult naked man or whatever. But there are passages in the book that squick me out much more than stuff in the adaptations.
I agree.
Yeah, I think, we're far enough into our discussion and we've made it clear we both like the book, and we're coming out at good faith.
Yeah,
I feel like we have the cred to actually get into this topic now. So there's a passage I want to read out. Well, first of all, there's something Freudian in that Henry gets dressed up in Claire's dad's clothes. That is what it is.
Yeah.
Some passages here from chapter 1. I'm flooded with years of knowledge of Henry while he's looking at me perplexed and fearful. Henry wearing my dad's old fishing trousers, patiently quizzing me on multiplication tables, French verbs, all the state capitals. Henry laughing at some peculiar lunch my 7-year-old self has brought to the meadow. Henry wearing a tuxedo, undoing the studs of his shirt with shaking hands on my 18th birthday. That's from their first date. Then on their first date, from Henry's perspective, he thinks she said she was a little girl. A plethora of unanswerables runs through my head. I stop and breathe for a minute. Okay. Later, Claire says, I think the first time for you was in 1981. I was 10. You kept saying, oh my God, and staring at me. Also, you seemed pretty freaked out about the nudity, and by then I just kind of took it for granted that this old nude guy was going to magically appear from the future and demand clothing. Okay, sidebar, the nudity. What do you think of the nudity stuff?
Ooh, I do think it's... What do you mean?
Well, okay, the nudity is one of the things to me that without the other stuff, I wouldn't think that much on it. Like, yes, it's weird. Adult man, materializes naked to young child. That's weird. But that's not the only context we get the nudity in. We get the nudity every time he time travels. My experience of the genre is time travel is naked sometimes. Like, look, Terminator, big example, because, depending on your method of timey-wimey time travel, it kind of makes sense, in the speculative fiction way that your clothes wouldn't time travel with you. So, like, the idea of time travel being naked inherently doesn't freak me out. Obviously, right. The author's the one making the choice to make it happen that way. But it has so much dramatic devices apart from just a naked man in meadow to young girl. Like, it's used to get Henry into trouble really quickly. It's obviously being used as a device in ways that aren't just to put a young man, to put a middle-aged naked man next to a young girl. It's being used enough in other ways that I don't side-eye it the way I do some other stuff.
Right. I see. I get what you mean now. And I do agree, basically. I was like, yeah, I do agree, like, pretty much exactly the same. I think it was Oliver in the first episode discussion raised an interesting point about how it feels kind of like a rebirth. Yeah. It's cool. But yeah, no, the fact that there is many more reasons for the nudity and stuff that stems from the nudity more than just a middle-aged man with a young girl, with a child in a field.
Yeah.
Again, yeah, I agree. It lends that goodwill to that. This is just a thing that happens rather than that weirdness being the only reason for it.
Yeah. From chapter 4, Henry is 35. In his mind, he's thinking, Claire is 13, is the scene.
Oh, no.
This is the year Claire got tall quickly. In the past year, she has grown 5 inches, and she has not yet become accustomed to her new body.
I know the line.
Breasts and legs and hips all newly minted. I try not to think about it as I watch her walk up the path to the house. I'm trying not to think about it as well.
Yeah,
Audrey.
Yeah, it's really...
this is a 35-year-old man watching a 13-year-old... Okay, Game of Thrones, a running theme of our discussion here. I know a lot of people will like say, the reasons for so-and-so nudity in the show or in the books or sexual assault in the books, blah, blah, blah. Often it does make sense, in context or whatever. But there's aspects... I'm a big fan of George R. R. Martin. I've read so much of his work and everything. So I'm not, I'm not going on some crusade here. But it's weird to me how in detail he describes female bodies, where he doesn't the male ones to the same degree, especially when they're naked, in the sense that a lot of people will read the first Game of Thrones novel, the one from 96, and be like, I'm hearing a lot about this 13-year-old's breasts. You know, in these Daenerys chapters, is she really feeling, you know, all the nuances of how they move against her clothes and everything? This feels like a little too much detail, especially when I don't hear about how, you know, like the underclothes brush against, you know, the male characters' unmentionables or whatever. So there is a kind of, the author is choosing to dwell on certain things, you know, in books, you know, nothing needs to be described so much as the author is choosing which bits to describe. So this is from Henry's internal narration or whatever, which just means that I'm then thinking about, what do you want me to think about the character? Am I meant to think, like, what am I meant to think here? Is he sexually interested in her as a 13-year-old, or is he trying not to be sexually interested? If he's trying not to be, does that mean like there is a potential for him to, like, I'm basically confused about this passage. I'm not sure what I'm meant to think, and I'm not sure what's going on there.
Yeah, the subject matter it's raising is very questionable in a way that you'd think that would be leading to a more, you know, salient point about something than it just existing.
Yeah.
In the sort of unquestioned way that it does.
Yeah. Especially because chapter 4, I don't know the author or the book style well enough yet.
Yeah, definitely. It's really early on.
So I'm not sure, like, is the discomfort, to what extent am I meant to feel, like, what am I meant to feel is basically my question there. It's like,
where is this going?
Like, is she intentionally mixing creepiness with the star-fated Destiny lover stuff? Is she trying to make a comment on grooming, or is she doing something else? Like, obviously, the situation isn't entirely analogous to grooming as we understand it. Henry doesn't try and meet her as a child. He doesn't like being naked. The power differentials are complicated by the timey-wimey stuff, but Henry's not real. You know, the novelist is making the choices to tell the story that way. So at least for me, chapter 4, I was just really confused. Like, obviously, Henry's not trying to seduce Claire as a child, but bringing up, like, the idea of him having sexual interest in her body as a 13-year-old, like, I'm confused by, is that what's being brought up? And, like, what am I meant to think about it? It's confusing. And, of course, eventually we get to the second half of the book, and certainly Audrey very much intentionally was trying to bait us as readers with some of the tonal stuff, but I don't think the grooming stuff ever gets, like,
No, I don't think so either.
Resolution, the way that aspects of me are going, oh, fuck, the book is actually, you know, dark, does. Stuff about you thought this could have a happy ending does get resolved, but I never felt like a thesis or a commentary on the grooming thing was ever really ironed out. I just remained confused throughout the whole book, basically.
It is a very strange thing to be handling with such, just to be left in the air. It's a weird choice.
Yeah.
I don't know what I think of it either, especially as it's like, it's so early in the book.
Yeah. Also, Audrey context, she's a horror writer as well. She's done horror, which is what kind of brought me some goodwill, is that I'm going, well, you know, she's not like and especially how she bristles at the romance classification sometimes. She's not like a blinkered, you know, I don't want to dismiss romance writers, which is why I'm not saying romance writer, but like, she's not that, you know, she's done horror and stuff. So it makes me think she can't be unaware of the discomfort of this stuff, but I don't know what the idea is still, you know, for all of that. And I know some people just try and say, well, it's just complicating the characters and inducing tension and whatnot. But I feel like the possibility of your male main character sexualizing like a 13-year-old is kind of biting off more than you can chew if you're trying to do a romance story, basically. I think there would have been ways to kind of raise that kind of discomfort in things that aren't as dangerous as that. Like if she was, like when we get that kiss when she's 16, if you change that to she's 18 or 19 and it's still he forcefully kisses her and they haven't had sex and it's like he's unsure of the power differentials, he's still getting a lot of the gold you can get from the discomfort there, but you're doing it without pedophilia being brought into the mix. But you still can kind of mine the character stuff that gets mined from it. And my argument is the pedophilia stuff doesn't get any mining because we remain confused the whole time. So that's basically why she's just making it complicated and dark because, you know, that's an interesting story. That's why I don't really buy that argument here, because she does do that successfully with some stuff, but I don't see what could be mined from the vague possible pedophilia stuff that couldn't be mined just from tinkering with it a little bit to like make her older and then just make it more about him being forceful and the general power differential stuff, which she does quite well when they're both adults, a lot of the power differential stuff. But yeah, I don't buy that there's some master plan with the sexualizing her as a child stuff. It feels unresolved and confusing to me.
Yeah, it's weird.
So on that note, the other big scene I guess I wanted to bring up with that is, well, in the film, the first time they kiss is, they're actually a little vague about the age there. He thinks she's 18. She might be 16, as in the book, where he forcefully kisses her after the slap, after he's pissed off about nearly doing the vasectomy, the whole sequence.
Yeah.
In the show, they first kiss, am I remembering right that it's on like her 18th birthday when they first have sex? I don't think they kiss younger than that from Claire's perspective, do they?
No, I think you're, I think so.
And that is, that makes more sense to me. And we still get kind of, when she's 16, we do get kind of the goals you can get out of the power differential stuff in episode 3, and we do it without kind of making, more of a issue of it than it could be, the way I think the book does. Because in the book, they just start kissing when she's a teenager. And I was confused. I can see on my notes here, I'm going, did I miss something? And I Control F in the ebook, kiss. And no, I didn't miss something. They start kissing. Chapter 5, Claire is 16, Henry is 32. Kiss, I demand, and he kisses me. I kiss her carefully so as to not disturb the faux nosebleed. When did this... There's no real start of it in the book. It just kind of starts happening. It's like riding through a car wash. Kiss me, she demands. I do, and then I'm gone. So he kisses 16-year-old Claire. Then he comes to sleep naked with adult Claire in the same hour. When he kisses the little cigarette burn scars when she's 24, he's 32. Yeah. And the first kiss... So later on, that post-vasectomy sequence for Henry, they're arguing because he isn't telling Claire what he's upset about in the future. Tell me. Her face is inches from mine. I kiss her very roughly. She is resistant. I release her and she turns her back on me. That wasn't very nice, she says in a small voice. What is wrong with me? Claire, at 15, is not the same person who's been torturing me for months, refusing to give up on having a baby, risking death and despair, turning lovemaking into a battlefield strewn with the corpses of children. I put my hands on her shoulders. I'm sorry. I'm very sorry, Claire. It's not you. Please. She turns. She's crying and she's a mess. Miraculously, there's a Kleenex in my coat pocket. I dab at her face and she takes the tissue from me and blows her nose. You never kissed me before. Oh no. My face must be funny because Claire laughs. I can't believe it. What an idiot I am. Yeah, so their first kiss at 15, supposedly, is him forcefully kissing her and her resisting after he's mad about something she's doing in the future for her. Also that I would feel more goodwill to if there wasn't more weird sexualization stuff with child Claire in general. And I just, yeah. But of course, the narrative always exonerates Henry. Always. It's never his fault, in that he didn't choose to come to see her as a child. And, oh wait, well, he did know this was young Claire. Actually, no, he's not really exonerated for kissing her roughly there, is he? No. He chose to do that, and that was a very bad choice.
He kisses her again, like immediately afterwards, like an apology kiss. It's very that what's the word? This moment is, it's over so quickly. It's like, whoa, this is a big deal, and then it's just very tightly cleaned up and pushed away. Because it's like, I remember I noted down when I first read it, it's like how horribly, like in general, the story does a lot about how Henry's presence affects Claire's development. And this specifically being, I don't know if it's her first kiss ever or if it's her first kiss with Henry, but either way, that's like such a big moment. And for it to be wrapped up in it's already inherently weird, but also the anger and the roughness and the weirdness that Henry also brings in that particular moment. It feels like it should be such a big deal for this moment of like, and how that affects her, but I don't think it does really.
Yeah, and that's my issue, because there are thorny bits in the book where I do feel intent, like the novelist pokes at it in different ways, and it kind of, you can feel the arc to it, or it kind of gets resolved or at least developed interestingly. But the grooming stuff and the child sexualization stuff in general, I always feel confused over it more than anything else. Which is bad because it's playing with dicier stuff than a lot of the other topics that the book is dealing with, in thorny ways. And this is why I totally understand all the people that, just say this book isn't for me, or who stop reading it, or who don't engage with the adaptations, purely because it's really big stuff. I feel is being fumbled, at best here. And so it makes all the sense in the world to me why that is enough of a distancing thing for people. I think the adaptations both mitigate it, yes, even the TV show, in a lot of ways. But the book, it's a big book, and so you kind of inoculate it a bit by the size of it, and that it's not live action, so things seem less prevalent. But yeah, I feel it's handled worse here, honestly.
Yeah, I do think both adaptations have the benefit of maybe hindsight, maybe, just the general looking at it and seeing what worked and what didn't, and fixing is a strong word, but you know what I mean.
Especially because the book is aware of Henry changing Claire. Like, we get it a lot. That sequence with Henry and the young people where he's kind of music explaining to them and stuff, like the book is very aware of Henry kind of forces his preferences and interests onto people and things like that. And so, there's a good passage. She's like, "You're making me a freak." What is it? It's a good one. Or "You're turning me into you." It's something. No, that's Doctor Who.
It is.
Yeah, girl. It's not. Well, girl who waited. There's connections.
Lessons in survival.
How does the quote start?
Oh, they're talking about how she takes her coffee and she says, "You're making me into a freak."
That's it. Yeah, "You're making me into a freak." He says, "No, I'm not. You are so. Telling me I like coffee with cream and sugar before I hardly even taste it. I mean, how am I going to figure out if that's what I like or if I just like it because you tell me I like it?" It's like what we were saying with bands earlier. Yeah, absolutely. That's more kind of the predetermination stuff, I think. But there's kind of that tension between Henry's personality is to kind of impose what he likes onto people. And he's the type of person, I feel like, you explain a problem about your day and he immediately tells you how to fix it,
right?
Without checking if you just want to be heard or listened to first or whatever. He's the type of person who's always trying to kind of, I think, impose himself a bit. And that mixes interestingly with the predetermination stuff. And I think it's why the romance doesn't work for some people as well, is like, even if like in a vacuum, if these two characters would meet and fall in love and everything perfectly without any of the time travel stuff, the agency is removed by the conceit of the novel, of the circular fated stuff. But also his personality is his personality sinks in with the predetermination, which I think is the icky factor for some people, which is like, it's like this novel is built around exonerating him, or basically making his personality kind of have this fantasy thing of, well, he does get to condition his wife into liking these things because she would have always liked him, but the time travel thing means that he gets to make her like them, and then she would have always liked them anyway. It's like a get out of jail free stuff, so much of the time travel stuff for Henry. All the grief the time travel thing brings him, absolutely. It's a negative for him overall, but it's also like the construct of it kind of exonerates a lot of his personality traits, I think.
I think the word exonerates is really interesting there, where, specifically how it affects him and Claire. Very much so.
Yeah. Well, a kind of a related thing here, which is another thing the adaptations don't look at much at all. The book looks at a lot of, Audrey being a lapsed Catholic, I believe, is that Claire, like, especially as a child, is really into God and stuff. And, older Henry, he thinks stuff like her pragmatism and her romantic feelings about Jesus and Mary are at 13 almost equally balanced. A year ago, she would have said God without hesitation. In 10 years, she will vote for determinism. And 10 years after that, Claire will believe that the universe is arbitrary, that if God exists, he does not hear our prayers, that cause and effect are inescapable and brutal, but meaningless. And after that, I don't know. But right now, Claire sits on the threshold of adolescence with her faith in one hand and her growing skepticism in the other, and all she can do is try to juggle them or squeeze them together until they fuse. She shakes her head. I don't know. I want God. Is that okay? I really like a lot of the stuff when she's young, because I was raised Catholic myself. I knew a lot of young Catholics, as a child, obviously, from that. And so I can tell Audrey knows that too. She really nails a lot of that experience of childhood being totally into it. And then that kind of point where they're able to fuse the kind of contradictory, to their mind or to Audrey's mind, contradictory ideas of Catholicism and religion with other ideas that, the adult versions might find contradictory, or at least Henry finds contradictory. And then that later stage of, more cynicism and opting out of it. I think Audrey does a really good job of making that all believable. Also, it very much does pattern into that stuff we're talking about with, Henry gets out of jail free for influencing her. If you believe he influences her with this stuff, which I think you can argue. And also, the predetermination stuff, it makes it, because when we hear, oh, Claire will stop believing in God, at X date or whatever, it kind of, I don't think it removes the stakes of it all, but it kind of it's an interesting way to do character development, I think, this big timey-wimey way where we like see it all at once, like Dr. Manhattan style. Yeah, what do you think of all the religion stuff and how that's written?
Well, I'm not raised religious, nor was I ever been religious, so I didn't get that familiarity in the same way you did, but I was able to, well, you know, I can like sort of understand. And I did really enjoy it. I thought basically just knowing, like, you know, being a child or a young person and believing in something and then questioning that belief is a pretty common thing, religious or otherwise. So I was able to relate on that. And I did think it was really well. You read out that tiny bit where she was like, I don't know, I just want God or whatever it is. Or like, I don't know, I just want it to be real. And that rang very true to me. That was really cute. But what I really just was reminded of when you were reading out that excerpt was when Henry is looking at Claire and thinking about, oh, at the moment she believes this, and then later on she'll believe this, and then blah, 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 how like weirdly clinical it was.
Yeah.
How it felt really, really strange how he's charted this all out, and he's like, this is what's going to happen, and this is what's going to happen, and it's like a kind of a weird satisfaction from him, because it's like she's becoming more
like me.
Well, it's like, yeah, exactly. But I was like, I realized it was like, where it's like grooming adjacent, isn't it?
I think Henry's personality just is a kind of force of will thing. You know, that's he likes what he likes, and he likes other people to like what he likes. And so, you know, certain choices the novel makes, you know, highlight that in. Sometimes you can tell he's meant to be the asshole in it, and sometimes it's weird because, But yeah, the book is like based around. Well, it's very much based around him, obviously. But it's interesting how a lot of the themes and ideas and character development kind of sync up with his personality. Yeah.
Yeah. It's a very Henry-centric. Yeah.
So something else kind of unique to the novel, we've touched on it a bit, but the chrono-impaired people stuff. The doctor who's not in the doctor who's not in the Moffat show at all is the molecular geneticist who discovers why people are chrono impaired. It's a genetic thing that he figures out in 2006. He's in the film, but the film doesn't get into the details so much as the book. Like, here's a passage from the book. It's funny that Claire is bringing this up. Back in 1999, Dr. Kendrick and I are engaged in philosophical trench warfare over this very issue. Kendrick is convinced that I'm a harbinger of a new species of human, as different from everyday folks as Cro-Magnon man was from his Neanderthal neighbours. I contend that I'm just a piece of messed up code, and our inability to have kids proves that I'm not going to be the missing link. And then in the second half of the novel, we get, like, Audrey goes to town. She literally has, like, the genetics isolated for what's going on with him. We get time travel mice that are, you know, synthesized out of Henry's DNA. And let's open up to discussing the second half now, I think. And so the second half means we get Alba, we get Henry's daughter, who can time travel, and, you know, the question of whether she's going to get experimented on as well. The book gets pretty sci-fi with all this time travel stuff. What did you think of that?
The book is extremely sci-fi. I think it's a welcome change.
A welcome change. A welcome difference.
A welcome difference. Yeah, the first part of it does. I think it covers pretty much all it can over the whole, the meaning, the meta, the blah blah blah. So any change would be welcome, but it is a really, really interesting like path to go down, because you wouldn't expect it being so romance focused at the beginning. You don't expect the very hard sci-fi. Well, relatively speaking, hard sci-fi. That does come up. But I really enjoyed it. I was really interested in it.
Yeah. My impression is the sequel will be even more sci-fi.
Yeah.
Because, well, in that scene where Henry visits the future, like the teacher understands what's going on. She's like, oh, chrono displacement or whatever. Okay, I understand what's going on here. I have duty of care, so I don't really like letting Alba off, but it's her dad, you know, I understand what's happening. So what? Like in the future, this is going to be normal? I see Audrey's talking about one of the reasons it's taken the sequel so long to write is she kind of has to invent a new world. Like here, the first book, she's describing places very familiar to her, like the library and, you know, a lot of the places of the novel. And when she's not, they're still in the world that she knows. In the sequel, she has to do it even more sci-fi. She has to come up with, well, people know about chrono-displaced or chrono-impaired people, therefore what's going to be different about society now. So I understand why the sequel is taking longer. I'll say a little bit about the sequel. So in the author's note, the bit I left out earlier is Audrey saying, 10 years after I finished writing The Time Traveler's Wife, I decided to revisit Henry and Claire's story to imagine what becomes of their daughter, Alba de Tamble. Alba's birthday is September 6, 2001. She comes into the world days before the attacks on the World Trade Center and the Pentagon. The world is changing abruptly before Alba has said a word or taken a step, before she knows anything but comforting parents and milk. But Alba is a time traveler, and she too will experience the joys and difficulties of a life lived out of order. She lives a double life, shared with two husbands, mixed up in the past, present and far-flung future. A life of music, kindness, white lies, and domestic anarchy. End of quote. So the sequel book is Audrey has two husbands. One is a time traveler and one is not. And, you know, it's like the future. And there's going to be some scenes set within... Well, there's going to be some scenes with Henry, so set before the end of the first book in that sense. But it sounds like it'll mostly be, you know, Alba's story in the future. What do you think of that?
That's really interesting. I did read the...
Preview
Yep.
stuff, yeah.
That's really interesting. Yeah, I'm excited for it in a weird way. How it again is our relationship built around time travel. It's so Alba can time travel and one of her husbands can too.
Yes.
Oh.
I don't know if it's going to have the kind of singular... The first book and the adaptations do a good job of kind of focusing down time travel, marriage, here are the metaphors, you know, especially the TV show. The sequel sounds a little more complicated to me. Like, I don't know if it's going to have that kind of novelty and strength of premise of, you know, what are the ideas we can explore with having two husbands and one time travels and one doesn't, and post 9/11 this, you know, 20 years later. It sounds a little more convoluted to me, but I'm confident. Like Steven Moffat, I think it's probably going to be really good, and I'm looking forward to reading it. And I think, you know, I said at the start of this that we're finishing our Time Wife coverage with this discussion, but I don't know if we will get to the musical. I'd love to, but I mean, like, we can hear the cast recording CDs, I'm sure, but like, I don't imagine either of us in Australasia are going to get to see the musical itself, especially who knows how long it'll run or wherever. So I don't know, maybe we'll discuss the cast recording. Maybe we'll get lucky enough to know someone who goes to a actual live version of it, but I can't guarantee that. What I can guarantee is, of course, we'll discuss The Other Husband eventually when it comes out. I'm sure Moffat will have stuff to say on it, and I'm sure we'll have stuff to say on it. So there's that little hope that whenever that book comes out, I'm sure we'll have more talk about it. But yeah, so the show may be cancelled, but at least the story kind of lives on in that there'll be Alba's story at some point. That sounds like an ending, but I'm not. I still have a few other things to talk about.
I was like, oh, are you wrapping up? But no.
Another theme I like, which is that in Audrey's words, loss is the most profound thing that happens to us. And, you know, that from there we get kind of the main theme, arguably, of it's important to treasure the moment and to take stock of a moment. But I really like that Steven Moffat obviously felt the exact same way because he harped on this all the time in his interviews about the TV adaptation. But loss being the most profound thing of the human experience. And then, of course, Henry's death plays into that, but also Henry's absence is the defining part of the novel, that he's always absent, you know, from Claire because of the time travel stuff. That's interesting. So how did that all work for you, the novel's exploration of loss? Really well.
I like how she mentioned it a lot in interview stuff you've said, and also the 10th anniversary intro thingy. But like,
yeah.
The way she uses time travel to represent or reflect on, like, as a metaphor for regular human experiences. I think doing it to represent loss, it works really, really well because, yeah.
I think the general strengths of the book are the premise is well thought through, and it just works really well. Time travel, metaphor, domesticity, romance, loss, experience of a marriage, contrasting childhood and adulthood. It all works, you know, and I have issues with the novel. Like, I think some stuff is treated too insensitive. I think there's too much insensitivity with some stuff. Not just the grooming stuff. There's also how to phrase this. The adaptations don't really do. I think it makes sense why the adaptations exercise some characters. I don't know if you had this experience. Did you find it weird how she describes black characters in the book?
I don't even remember any.
There's Nell and Celia, and she just tends to describe them in ways like she invokes
I remember the description.
Nell is how Aretha Franklin would be if she was Julia Child, or Celia, the light from the street turns her burnt umber skin blue and then purple. She looks like a glamorous Martian. And there's just a couple of weird, like, I don't feel like she describes the other characters in these sorts of ways.
It's weird because it is similar to her the thing that I went off on at the beginning about the weird, like, overly lavish descriptions of people, and like Claire is described as a Botticelli, and Celia is described as a Martian.
Yeah, it's I just feel like when the characters were black, I just felt they were described in kind of weird ways, and like really ways the other characters weren't described. That said, of course, this syncs up with Claire's background. She's from a rich family in rural Michigan. But yeah, there's like that thing with the novel and novels in general. Sometimes you can't tell, is this just really in character writing for a character, or is this not? Kind of on this note, to do with the sequel novel, Claire's time-traveling second husband, who's named, of all things, Oliver, like our friend we've done discussions of the show with.
Oliver.
Oliver, Albert's husband, is a time traveler from China who studied abroad in his teens in the UK. And then there's issues with why he couldn't go back to China and he's staying in the UK and all that. So, yeah. We'll see how she goes. We'll see how she goes with that. It's 20 years later. We'll see. Yeah, where I was going with all that is just, sometimes there's difficulties telling what stuff is just in character writing done very believably and what stuff is like just, weird kind of novelistic style bleeding through. But yeah. Oh yeah, the body horror we mentioned in terms of the show did it with Henry's feet being displaced over time. The film was very cowardly and did not remove his feet. The book, the miscarriage stuff. So before Alba happens, Claire keeps having miscarriages who like time travel out of her body because they're time travelers like Oliver and like Henry. This passage is pretty interesting. Yeah, body horror stuff for sure. So Wednesday, September 2000, Claire's 29. It's lying on the bed. There's some blood, but not so much. It's lying on its back, trying to breathe, its tiny ribcage quivering, but it's too soon. It's convulsing and blood is gushing from the cord in time with the beating of its heart. I kneel beside the bed and pick him up, my tiny boy, jerking like a small, freshly caught fish, drowning in air. I hold him so gently, but he doesn't know I'm here, holding him. He is slippery and his skin is almost imaginary. His eyes are closed and I think wildly of mouth-to-mouth resuscitation, of 911 and Henry. Oh, don't go before Henry can see you. But his breath is bubbling with fluid, small sea creature, breathing water, and then he opens his mouth wide, and I can see right through him, and my hands are empty, and he's gone. What the fuck? Like, the book gets... wow, what? Yeah. Like, the first half does not prepare you at all for...
Audrey being a horror writer, this tracks absolutely now.
Yeah, and that's not the only sequence where something like that happens. It happens multiple times of a miscarriage traveling out of Claire and Claire seeing it, and wow, the back half of the book is more original than the first half, and it's pretty crazy. And even apart from the miscarriages, like how Henry expires, it's like gruesome, and it's I like the second half more because like it's a punishing read, but it's like
definitely
Audrey's horror skills come to the fore, and it's just wow. And I feel more intent with what she's doing. Whereas the creepy stuff in the first half, I'm like, I don't know if I'm meant to see this as creepy or not. Here I know exactly. I feel like
right.
I feel like she's writing it and I'm reacting it in emotionally appropriate ways for all of us. Yeah. She's very effective with the horror stuff. I really liked how, the back half of the novel I much preferred to the first half. Some really well done horror. And just the whole final stretch of the book with Henry expiring basically is just... It's so well realized in his head, and it's just so nightmarish. I really like the second half.
I loved the miscarriage sequence, the miscarriages sequence. It felt very, very, very. Well, it was so nightmarish, and it was like it felt really believable because we'd been following Claire and Henry for a really long time by this point, and so. I admired the choice to not pull away from that moment and to show it in all its discomfort.
Yeah.
because that yeah.
Oh, I guess that's the difference here is we feel with some of the grooming stuff, it's like it's raised and then it's not really explored.
Definitely. Yeah. It's like one paragraph or a line.
Yeah. But the miscarriage stuff I feel is, and Claire's Catholicism is brought more into it. And even when we get like some disgusting attitudes toward adoption in the book, it feels kind of true to the characters, true to Claire, especially. And it's unlikable, but it's more unlikable in the ways where like the grooming stuff, I remember, do you realize how, like, this isn't just unlikable, this is like pedophilic if you're describing a 13-year-old in such a way. But the fucked up attitudes toward adoption feel very baked into, stuff that's actually really getting explicated with the characters there. So the darkness in the second half works more for me than the darkness in the first half. Yeah.
It just follows. It feels like there's follow-up. Yeah. Which is good and necessary when you're tackling something like you are.
Yeah.
What I was going to say really quick is that I also like how the miscarriage stuff happens much more linearly than many other parts. Yeah.
So this is from an interview, that 2006 interview with Audrey. And she's saying whether she scrapped much, because, we heard how she wrote the novel kind of all over the place before bringing it together. And Audrey says, I didn't scrap much. Originally, the book was darker. For example, in my original idea of the book, Claire lost her mind for a while at the end, and Henry and Claire never did manage to have a kid. But as I worked with the thing, I realized that unremitting darkness wasn't the way to go. I found it unbearable to work on, and it would have been unbearable to read. I simply had a sense that the balance of the book required joy as well as defeat. So, man, she was going to go even more.
Yeah,
no Alba.
Wow, that's surprising.
Claire going insane. Like, wow, I'm sure she would have written it well. But yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, I agree. It would have been like too difficult to read. I like when she says that like she needed to balance it out with joy.
Yeah.
Because a lot of the book is like sort of a microcosm of life. And yeah, you need joy in life.
Both all three versions of the story we have right now are different in how they end. Well, I won't tell you how the film ends in case we ever watch it, but there's similarities to the book's ending, but it's very much not the book's ending. Not at all. TV show, of course, ends kind of halfway through, kind of a moment of grace of, really that theme of, treasuring the moment.
Also, just quickly, I love the television finale. I love it so much.
Yeah. I know we've got, in the discussion of the film, Oliver and Nate joke how we're going through the process of grief as we're trying to like come to terms with the show ending, halfway through the book. But I know you and I both believe the show very much did include and embed some imagery and some suggestions and themes from the second half of the book in a way that, like, it is cut short, of course, and I would have loved to see Moffat in his own style and interests realize the second half of the book, but I don't feel like the second half wasn't in there at all. It was in there. It's just in there in like the time trippy sequence. And, we saw Alba more than once in the TV show. We saw her in episode 6, but do you remember where else we saw her?
Yes, I do. She was in, I can't remember, episode 1
Episode 2. Episode 2.
Episode 2. Yeah. She's on like a school trip.
Yep. So the TV show, it touches the second half of the book. Yeah, absolutely. Oh yeah. So the book's ending, the book ends with Henry comes back to Claire when she's very, very old. Basically, Henry's 43 and he zips forward to Claire when she's 82, and it's their final reunion. Claire, very much in her old age, uniting with Henry once more. So the ending is interesting. The last chapter, the first half of it is Henry's point of view when he's 43 and Claire's 82 on July 24, 2053, and they embrace, her being this old. And then the actual ending of the book is before that, Monday, July 14, so some days earlier than their last reunion. Claire is 82, 2053, and it's Claire waiting for him. And so the book doesn't actually end in their reunion. It ends going a few days before the reunion to Claire waiting for Henry. The book ends with, I know Henry will come eventually. I sometimes wonder if this readiness, this expectation prevents the miracle from happening, but I have no choice. He is coming and I am here.
It ends with Claire waiting.
Yeah.
As the rest of the book is.
Yeah. My kind of impression of the waiting, it's kind of a metaphor for death for me, in like Claire waits all her life to her old age and then she reunites with Henry at a young age, no less. This is very much a thing. I'm sure a lot of other people have lost people at people I've lost. I don't imagine them like the age they would be now. I kind of imagine them the way that I lost them.
Yeah, definitely. Of course.
So it feels very much like a metaphor for that for me, that she reunites with Henry at 43 when he died, and she's 82. It's like, the thought of when we die, at least in the believing in heaven way, the Catholic way of Claire, the idea that you get to reunite with them. It's very much a metaphor of death stuff at the end for me. And I like that it encompasses Claire's old age, which is, the film in general focuses less on Claire, but it feels incomplete to me without this older Claire and seeing her waiting for decades. I know Henry only visits Alba and not Claire, kind of in those last times to stop her from always having the expectation of waiting. But yeah, what's the tone of the ending to you? Is it romantic? Is it tragic? Is it both? How do you feel about it?
The whole last ending bit I found so tragic. I felt it was so awful. I felt like basically Claire had just been trapped her entire life waiting for Henry, and even after he dies, when he tells her he's going to see her one more time or something.
Yeah,
that's how she knows to do the waiting. That was so mean to me.
Yeah, I feel like that is, it's his character, but it's also kind of the metaphor to me of
definitely,
someone like, if she believes in heaven, I know she's not meant to, at that age, but lapsed Catholics, they go back and forth. Is the kind of the idea of, well, I will see them, again, one way or another. There's always a way for me to see them eventually, and that's when I die.
Yeah, and I think that would have been nice, but he explicitly says, I'm going to come back. And so even though he's not there anymore, he's dead, and he doesn't come to visit her apart from one time when she's 82. But she does have to, so even without him, she's basically, get what I mean? She's been stuck in this whole thing of waiting for Henry, and Henry's been such a big part of her life, and Henry's been so developmental and instrumental, and she's basically been stuck, attached to Henry. And then even when he dies, she's not, I know that you could read that in a nice way of being love and connection, and she never really loses him, but also I felt like she never really gets to live her life.
It's her tragedy, isn't it? That's her whole life is
her whole life. She
formed around Henry. Yeah,
she's formed around her, and even when he goes, she's still stuck, attached to him, and it was just really depressing to me watching her, when she was 80 and sitting and waiting for him.
I like with a book, it's interesting. Some people will read some aspects of it as romance, and others will read it as tragedy or as horror. I think you can read Claire's relationship to Henry in all three of those ways. There's an intoxicating romance to it, absolutely. There's also this tragedy of, the sadness of her being reduced in some ways. And also I think there's a kind of horror to, she's kind of trapped by him as well. It's not by his choice, but it still is kind of a trap as much as the cage is for Henry. I like that. I think Audrey's good at that kind of stuff of the more horror or the more tragic aspects of it. Yeah. I find the ending sad, but more, I find it encompassing in a way that the TV show, just out of scale and scope, didn't get to be. It's a very encompassing ending the show has, but of course, not doing the whole story, means it is what it is. And the film ends in a much less encompassing way to me. The film almost ends in a forgettable way to me, because I think it takes an easy way out of how it ends.
Taking an easy way out is what I'm gathering the film does a lot of.
Yeah, the film has its strengths, and I really admire that it has a really firm control on tone in a way that the TV show and the book don't. But yeah, it's less ambitious, for sure. It's interesting, yeah. I think maybe my favourite scene with the last stretch of the book, I know this might be Oliver's favourite scene as well, I think he said, is Claire trying to have sex with Gomez after Henry's dying. What did you think of that scene?
It's definitely one of the most memorable. It's one that stuck in my mind, and at first I was very confused with it, and I was really kind of weirded out, but then reading it in the context of what we were just talking about, how it's sad that she's so trapped, it is a really interesting thing to see her trying to move on, is a weird word, but have a life and make a decision of her own, even if it's a very strange decision. I do like it, how prickly I find it.
Yeah, I'm going to read it out because I think it's so good. So Claire is 37 here. Henry is dead. Claire is at Gomez's place, I think.
Yeah, they are.
Yep, okay. And so they're talking. Are you dating anybody? No. Why not? None of your business, Gomez. It never occurred to me. You should think about it. Why? You need someone new. You need something new, someone new. You can't sit around for the rest of your life waiting for Henry to show up. Sure I can. Watch me. Gomez takes 2 steps and he's standing next to me. He leans over and puts his mouth next to my ear. Don't you ever miss this? He licks the inside of my ear. Yes, I miss that. Get away from me, Gomez. I hiss at him, but he doesn't move away. I am riveted in my seat by an idea. Gomez picks up my hair and kisses the back of my neck. Come to me, oh come to me. I close my eyes, hands pull me out of my seat, unbutton my shirt, tongue on my neck, my shoulders, my nipples. I reach out blindly and find terry cloth, a bath towel that falls away. Henry. Hands unbutton my jeans, pull them down, bend me back over the kitchen table. Something falls to the floor, metallic, food and silverware, a half circle of plate, melon rind against my back. My legs spread, tongue on my cunt. Oh. We are in the meadow. It's summer, a green blanket. We have just eaten. The taste of melon is still in my mouth. Tongue gives way to empty space, wet and open. I open my eyes. I'm staring at a half-full glass of orange juice. I close my eyes. The firm, steady push of Henry's cock into me. Yes, I've been waiting very patiently, Henry. I knew you'd come back sooner or later. Yes, skin on skin, hands on breasts. Push, pull, clinging rhythm. Deeper, yes, oh. Henry. Everything stops. A clock is ticking loudly. I open my eyes. Gomez is staring down at me. Hurt? Angry? In a moment, he's expressionless. A car door slams. I sit up, jump off the table, run for the bathroom. Gomez throws my clothes in after me. And there's a little more there, and it ends with Claire thinking, what am I doing? What have I become? You are the traveller now.
Really, really, yeah, super good.
Just great character stuff. Really well realised. I think that it's so memorable. It's so spiky and it's so memorable.
That is such a fascinating moment for her as a character.
Yeah, it feels so... It just feels very real to me, and I feel like...
It feels very real. And it feels how kind of like... We're speaking about how she's trapped in her love of Henry, but it's interesting how she's kind of the willing participant in it. She's making the active choice there to do that, and it's like... Which then raises the interesting question of, is she trapped? Is she choosing to do that because of the self-determinism stuff? Is she still in that? I am remembering why I hated it at first. Is because I don't like Book Gomez.
Oh, he's a bit different, isn't he? He's blonde, he's like a greaser.
He is a dick.
Yeah.
So that was my main thought. I was like, no, not him. He's a dick. And like, this is an interesting point for Claire, and I enjoy it because of that, but he's a dick.
It's in general, I think our kind of running theme here is Audrey's really good at the uncomfortable stuff when she's trying to make it uncomfortable.
Yeah. Well, I guess it's just a general point of when they're doing stuff on purpose versus, or not necessarily, but whether the intent is realized. What I was going to say is, we were talking about the moment where Henry comes back to her.
Yeah.
What I thought was that was a lie from Henry. I didn't think he was going to come back. When he tells her as he's dying, he's going to come visit her again. I honestly thought he was never going to come back. I thought that was him giving her hope or giving her some nice memory to keep going on in a very selfish way from him. It's like, oh, she's going to be so lost without me. I'm going to give her this nice white lie to live on with. And I was like genuinely surprised when he showed up at the end. I didn't think he was coming back.
Oh, that's interesting. Would you have preferred that?
Oh, that's an interesting question. On my first reading of it, I took it like as fully like romantic fairy tale. Oh my gosh, it's so beautiful giving back to her.
Yeah.
So I didn't mind, but the more I thought about how tragic and kind of horrific the whole ending of it was, I don't know, it still would have been like, especially when I was like, by saying that he kind of traps her in still thinking of him, whereas she could have just, thought of him by choice, by remembering him, but now she constantly has that he's coming back soon, he's coming back at some point. So I'm glad he came back.
Right. There's an interview from this year I think is really relevant to us that keys in with loads of what we've been talking about actually. So this is from this year because it was spurred on by the TV show. And so Audrey says, I don't think I had encountered the word grooming in 1997 when first writing the novel, but I was familiar with the concept. It's obviously inappropriate for grown men to be hanging out with little girls unsupervised. That's why it's in the book. It's weird. It's the way that time travel is messing with them. It's not meant to be shown as a model. Henry knows it's a bad idea, and he's doing his best to be hands-off and parental because he's the antithesis of somebody who is trying to groom a kid. It's clear in the book that he's unsettled by this. There's more of the interview I want to get to, but first, Henry exists through her. It's basically my thing. There's no real Henry. And Henry knows it's a bad idea and he doesn't try and groom her. That's all well and good. My issue is more that he sexualizes her at all. That he's like staring at a 13-year-old's breasts and thinking, man, I gotta, take stock of what's happening here. Like, that's the weird bit to me. It's not just the possibility of grooming or otherwise. It's the pedophilic attraction in the first place, being embedded in the book at all.
I agree.
But like she's saying there, it's meant to be weird. It's meant to be, wrong. That I feel that more in other stuff because like we read out some passages that, like we said, confused us with that. Audrey also saying, there are people who say it's not sci-fi enough and people who say this isn't a romance. And I'm like, yeah, it's a book. I didn't want to peg it to anything so specific.
Definitely.
Yeah, I think we both have that same impression. That's something we like about the book, I think, is that it travels between, it's a bit of a traveler between genres. She also says people are very focused on child abuse these days. What was seen as no big deal in the 1980s is now seen as neglect. In the novel, Claire was born in 1972. Steven Moffat has brought the whole timeline forward by 20 years. A child of the early 2000s would have been more watched over. In earlier days, I got a lot of blowback from feminists who objected to the title defining Claire in relationship to her husband Henry. Now it's this. People seem to want to jump up and down on this new version with cleats. I would just note that the complicated and messy lives of the characters are not necessarily endorsed by the author. And then she just compliments the show a bit. Interesting interview.
Yeah.
She seems to bristle a bit at the I think like Moffat, I think they're responding to certain complaints and they're not responding to
very much so.
They're responding to very specific stuff about in the story but they kind of, I don't think her or Moffat addressed so much the broader why is this in here at all kind of stuff.
Yeah, I found that very much, especially with the grooming stuff.
Yeah. The timeline, we didn't talk about that, but that is interesting to me. There are a lot of little changes across the adaptations with that. But the timeline being different, yeah, that gives the book its own feel. And it is a little bit different with how Claire and her family's dynamic would have worked. That's an interesting little difference for people between the book and show. The time period, yeah. Of course, the 9/11 stuff is, yeah, the book feels very 2003.
Yeah.
The 9/11 segment, yeah.
Her talking about the title, how there was blowback from feminists about how it frames Claire purely in her relationship to Henry, which is very much the point of the book. Or maybe not the point of the book, but what happens in the book.
I think I've said pretty much everything I had in mind for this. Anything else you've got on your mind as we finish up?
No, not really.
My last thoughts are all on paper. They're harder to look at. Let's see. What have I got? Yep, we discussed that. Enjoy being alone. Gene therapy. Kangaroos. Why did I have kangaroos down?
What is kangaroos even?
Let me see. I marked that to Control F.
Oh.
Yeah. That's. Wait, what is the context of this? What is going on here?
Is it their first time?
Yeah,
yes. I think it's their first time.
I've got to read this out. I can't let people be spared of this passage. When Claire loses her virginity on her 18th birthday with Henry, and it's all very prepared by her, she's been looking forward to it. They're doing these weird flirtations before they start the proceedings. In my notes, I had the word kangaroos marked down to look up. That's why I've just come across this passage here. So as Henry is preparing Claire for the sex about to have, he says, imagine yourself as open, empty. Someone's come along and taken out all your innards and left only nerve endings. Poor little Claire, no innards. But it's a good thing, you see, because there's all this extra room in there. Think of all the stuff you could put inside you if you didn't have all those silly kidneys and stomachs and pancreas and whatnot. Like what? She's very wet. I remove my hand and carefully rip open the condom packet with my teeth, a maneuver I haven't performed in years. Kangaroos, toaster ovens, penises. Claire takes the condom from me with fascinated distaste, and then they go on with the sex and everything. What's with that dialogue? Yeah,
I guess that's that kind of talk it feels very real in how weird it is. That sort of...
Yeah, I agree. It's uncomfortable in the way like written dialogue isn't normally.
Yeah, It feels in the way that if you overheard that, it'd be like, because that's basically what we're doing. It feels more voyeuristic than most of the book, where we're very intrusive on this very personal scene.
Yeah. Interesting. Oh, of course, this is the second scene she wrote. We talked about at the start that she wrote that losing your virginity is the 18th birthday sequence. That was one of the very first bits of the book she wrote. So there you go.
And it's one of the last things we're talking about.
Well, yeah. Before we go then, what was your favorite aspect of the book, or your favorite sequence or scene? We've touched on some of them already. I can tell you mine.
Yeah.
And it's that whole last stretch, Henry in the cage, and when everything starts falling apart from Henry and he starts withering. I think Audrey did a great job with that. And then Claire losing Henry and all that. I think she's great with the dark stuff. And I was really engaged with all that stuff because it was such a surprise for the novel to get so dark, even beyond the body horror of the miscarriage. It just kept going, and so interesting and inventive for like a romance, a time travel romance story to get so aggressive like that towards the end. So I was really taken by the last stretch of the book, which basically the show didn't get to at all, and the film nominally got to, but it didn't embed any of the tone of darkness here in my eyes. So nice, unique thing to the book was just how dark it got towards the end. I really liked all that stuff. What about you? What was your favorite general sequence of the book?
Ooh, okay. I think one of my favorites that we haven't touched on was always crashing in the same car. The reason I liked it was a very sort of a high concept idea, sort of an interesting use, more interesting than usual use of the time travel stuff. And it was quite early on in the book, and that was a very pleasant surprise. I absolutely loved the visual idea of all the Henrys visiting that particular one point in time. So that was a really early point where I was like, I vibe with this. This is going to do some interesting things.
It's very evocative imagery, and I think it's also a big time where Audrey's like saying, time travel metaphors galore, are what we're going to be doing here. It's not just a gimmick or a sci-fi thing. I'm using it to kind of really realize these kind of mental experience of stuff. It's like, it's such a great experience of your head keeps going back to a traumatic event, but the conceit of the book lets you do that literally. Henry is literally at the same event, untold times. Yeah. Great. That's a great sequence. Yeah. Great imagery in the book for that.
Yeah.
So that concludes our discussion on the Time Traveler's Wife novel. And yeah, so we've had discussions on all 6 TV episodes, on the film, and now the novel itself. We're hitting some finality here. But I'm sure sometime after the sequel novel releases, whenever that is, that we'll have some things to say about it as well, of course. But for now, thank you to those listening, and please let us know any of your opinions on the novel, how it does or does not compare to its adaptations, what we had to say about the book, any other thoughts you care to share as well. And thank you very much for listening. Thanks.